Welcome back to Bold and Blunt, the video version. And now I am really happy to have with me Samantha Fillmore, State Government Relations Manager with the Heartland Institute. And Samantha, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So Heartland Institute is taking a real lead on fighting back against the big tech stifling of conservative voices. And I just read a little brief from Heartland Institute's press package on what Florida is doing, but kind of fill in what this bill details.
Absolutely. So this bill that was signed into law on May 24th by Governor DeSantis is Florida Senate Bill 7072. Also as known as an act relating to social media platforms. Basically what this does, it's very extensive, it's about 20 pages. It addresses the issue of censorship and deplatforming for Florida constituents and also importantly, political candidates in Florida if they feel that they have been censored or deplatformed based on religious or political speech. So this bill, while very extensive, creates fines and allows an appeals process for individuals if they have been censored or feel that they have been unrightfully censored based on simply what they say.
Let's talk about the word censored for a second, because you and I discussed this earlier, and I just want to go a little bit more in depth. Why can't a free market company, why can't a privately owned social media company publish what it wants and boot the voices it doesn't want?
I love this question. Well, absolutely they can. And this is a really interesting topic and question that is always posed to me because I work for a free market think tank. I generally subscribe to free market ideals. And so the question of, well, why should the government tell a private entity what to do always comes up. And to that, I would like to submit to you that through Section 230, which I hope we'll get into the details of that in a little bit, these platforms are provided a liabilities gift that other publishers, such as the Washington Examiner, don't get because these platforms claim to be a bulletin board or a third-party entity. However, they begin to censor, and this legislation, well, that just Section 230 and allowing that liabilities gift is a corruption in the free market. It's a gift only prescribed to these big tech platforms. And so we simply just want to correct the corruption in this market. If Facebook were to come out tomorrow and say, we are entirely an organization of the left, we agree, these are the tenets we subscribe to, these are the viewpoints we will promote, that would be one thing. But they claim to be free and fair and unbiased, and that simply on its face is untrue, which you and I discussed previous. We could get into whether that's a breach of contract or deceptive trade practices. But yes, so generally there is nothing wrong with an organization such as Parler when it came out doing that. But this market is very corrupted. This is not the product of a healthy free market.
Can you kind of sum up Section 230 in a layman's point of view, in a layman's definition?
Absolutely. So Section 230 is the 1996 Communications Decency Act, and it provides rightfully a federal statute to insulate what is allowed on the networks of communication. So this was on the precipice of when we had TV coming out, and more racy, if you will, TV shows portraying on networks. It was a way to prevent lewd, lascivious, pornographic content from being in all of our means of communication. And I think Section 230 is good federal statute. And so that exists for a reason, but it once big tech started to come onto the scene, this is something new unlike we've ever seen before. Because before, if you wanted to write about something, you submitted an op-ed, you did something like what you do, or you submitted to a publication, wrote to an author. So this was a new concept, and we're really not sure, and we haven't been sure on how to insulate that in terms of publishers' rights and in terms of content. And so Section 230 arose in a way that protected big tech because these platforms claimed to not be a publisher and to not be a speaker, but like I said before, to be almost like an inanimate bulletin board. And through that, they claimed, because we're not the ones posting, we're simply a host for other users, we shouldn't be liable for anything that comes up on our newsfeed, on our content. And that is how they got the liability, which makes sense on its face. But then once big tech started to censor, deplatform, edit, remove posts, like establish norms of an Overton window of what they felt could be acceptable speech, then obviously that's entering into an editorial context. And that is where we come in with this legislation, just simply to remove the shield and allow them to be open to litigation and liability, because they are clearly editors now.
Especially the political speech. You know, if they just censored offensive speech or vulgar speech or speech that tried to express violence or desires for violence, that would be one thing. But, you know, to boot Donald Trump, and actually now what did they do? They expanded that booting until 2022 or 2023. I find that the height of arrogance.
Absolutely. And even a more recent example, because Donald Trump is a highly controversial figure. So in trying to get this legislation through bipartisan, I try to point to other examples for obvious reasons. But on Friday, Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, he was suspended from YouTube. And what had happened in this instance was he, and obviously a member of his communications team, posted a video of a speech that he had given. And in this speech, he touted hydroxychloroquine as a possible treatment for COVID, which a lot of prominent and successful doctors have acknowledged may be a very reasonable treatment. However, that is not the treatment and not the science that the YouTube overlords, I don't even know who to call, but whoever controls YouTube. Perhaps, yes. That they don't subscribe to that notion. They don't subscribe to those ideals. I doubt whoever's making these decisions for YouTube are medical doctors. And yet Senator Ron Johnson had his YouTube account suspended for 7 days. And that's frightening. We're skewing information just because someone doesn't agree with it. That's not the accepted large viewpoint. It's outrageous. It's unacceptable. It's Orwellian.
Yeah, that is the word for it, Orwellian, for sure. I want to get to some of the wins and some of the fights that you guys have been waging. But before we get to that, I wonder, because you've been involved from the ground up with this issue. So you've been paying attention, I'm sure, to what the big tech CEOs say and their demeanors and when they testify on Capitol Hill. And I just wonder, is there any chance in your mind, do you think, that they sincerely believe they are not censoring conservatives or they are not targeting their censorship?
Absolutely not. No, I think it's very clear, unless I mean, it is very possible that they are so surrounded in an echo chamber of people who validate and believe their beliefs that they have this skewed version of reality, which very well may be true. I feel like that is the case for a lot of elites. So that may be the case with your Zuckerbergs. But no, I think it's pretty apparent. And I have plenty of friends who definitely do not subscribe to the political ideals that I do. And after sitting down and explaining all of this, do you really believe that doesn't happen? And most people who have a level-headed head on their shoulders can, and some semblance of self-awareness, can admit that. I don't know why it is so difficult for the federal government or lawmakers on the left to see that, but also I'm really interested for a lot of the way that Republicans have voted. Again, I've been on the boots on the ground for a lot of these states, and I've had Republicans who I know should probably vote for this legislation and their constituents would want to, and they vote no, or they, in fact, remove themselves from voting. So I'm interested when campaign contributions come out. That's where we start to, but that's a little more of the cynical side of me. But we do have big tech lobbying and donating to a lot of these candidates and elected officials. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit.
Yeah, I don't think that's cynical. I think that indeed is what's happening. If you look at some of the campaign donations, and I've done this, you can see that some of those on Capitol Hill, they will ride the media circuit to denounce big tech. But at the same time, when it comes time to voting, their voices speak very differently. And, I agree with you that it seems to me that it's disingenuous to think that Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg don't have some sort of knowledge that they are purposely targeting certain voices and purposely simultaneously allowing certain other voices a free platform. That just defies logic to think that they don't know that's happening. But let's look at Heartland. Let's look at some of the stuff you guys have been doing. It's not just in Florida. You've been nationwide with this. Give me the latest on what you guys are fighting for in the different states.
Yes. So we have seen 70 pieces of big tech legislation in 30 states, and it all manifests in a myriad of different ways based on what the sponsor thinks might be best suited for their constituents and the composition of the legislature. However, Florida was it was between Florida and Texas for our golden child to take it home. This is, like I said, very controversial legislation, and there are definitely questionable motives between lawmakers when it comes to voting on this. So we knew this was going to be a really hard sell. This was not an easy piece of legislation that you could just send through. This was going to be a really extensive effort from all fronts. And we had a multi-pronged approach for this and policy briefs and being in the state capitals and testifying, which I was very grateful to do on this piece of legislation that thankfully passed in Florida. But we knew it was probably going to come down to our Tennessee or our Florida or our Texas, and Florida just happened to be the one. And that was really, honestly, all we needed was one, because now we have countersuits from trade organizations that represent Facebook and a lot of the other big tech and Twitter and all the other big tech platforms. And they are countersuing this law, basically asserting that it is unconstitutional, which I can get into is not true. There is, in fact, a provision in Section 230 that allows for state-based legislation. But the only way that this was really going to really sort itself out was going to be through the courts. I don't think that President Trump did try in May of 2020 to prevent big tech from doing this through executive order. However, I think it's best for the republic, and I think it's best just on its face to not do executive orders because they can always be repealed, and we've gotten into the habit of too many from all presidents. But this is really going to work itself out in the court, and I think it will. I believe that it'll get up to the Supreme Court level, and that'll be where we figure out, how do we treat these big tech companies? Do they have First Amendment rights, or are they a common carrier? Are they more like a place of public accommodation? So there is still some moving, and there is some of this legislation moving in different states, such as New Jersey, Oregon, Pennsylvania. But we really just needed the one to get it to where we want to in the court system.
But it was sort of the perfect storm, the backlash of the American people, the booting of Trump from social media, which I think even some of the Democrat Party did not agree with. And then the strong governor in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis. You couldn't have asked for a better water carrier on this piece of legislation, really. And as you said, it is headed for court.
Absolutely. Yes. So if I can speak a little bit about that, because you and I talked about it before. The argument that attorneys will be making in court is going to be that this law is simply unconstitutional, and that it is defying the First Amendment rights of these companies. And that will be for Supreme Court justices to decide. Is it, and what I think is interesting, and what I say to lawmakers in the states is, so which is it? Is it First Amendment rights of individuals and American citizens, or First Amendment rights of corporations? That's kind of what we're dealing with here. Which do you which one do you want to defend? Which one do you want to vote for? And it should be a no-brainer, but unfortunately, more times than not, a lot of lawmakers lean towards the First Amendment rights of these corporations. But Section 230, in it's subsection E, subparagraph 3, that I actually wrote. I wanted to quote this for you. But it says this section, nothing in this section shall be construed to prevent any state from enforcing any state law consistent with this section. So it very much, it's literally written into the Section 230 statute that there is a provision for state-based legislation. And furthermore, on the Florida bill, which I have with me, it says in Section 1, subsection 4, this section may only be enforced to the extent not inconsistent with federal law of 74 47 U.S. Code Section 230. So in Section 230, you're allowing a provision for this Florida law. And in the Florida law, it further enforces that this is completely pursuant to Section 230. So it's literally in the laws. I don't understand where the question about the constitutionality of this legislation is coming from, but we'll see. I mean, that's for legal minds greater than mine to decide.
Because what they're hoping is to get judges that are sympathetic to their cause, basically. They're looking for those activist nuggets and so forth. And that's how the left wins in court, right? They make the emotional case and they bypass the constitutional case. And, they basically throw the dice and hope for that justice or that judge or that court that will see their emotional plea.
Absolutely. That is very true. On that note, I will say that in early April, Justice Clarence Thomas came out and spoke about this. And this is before any of this legislation had passed. So my thought at that time was, I think these Supreme Court justices are looking at this issue and they're like itching. They're begging for a state to pass a law like this so that they can hear it in court. But he pretty much asserted that platforms should be treated or regarded as common carriers or places of public accommodation, and that he doesn't think that as an entity or corporation they necessarily have an outright First Amendment right. So that was an encouraging, right? We were in the middle of it. I think I was in Texas at the time. That was an encouraging nugget for me to get me all hyped up to go back in and testify.
So if this law that Florida has in place right now, and I think it's due to go into effect, in July? It's taking effect soon, right?
Yes, ma'am.
If this law holds up in court, I mean, how is that going to change how social media platforms are run?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I think that they will still try to find ways to explicitly pull off and censor some content. But what is important about this legislation is that it will finally allow people to have an appeals process, to be told why. Because I have met reverends and leaders of nonprofits and just Americans that have no malice in their heart who wake up one day and their pages are gone. And that's a source of advertising or revenue or income for their family. And they wake up and poof, the page is gone and they have no way to get it back. There's no appeals process. There's no way for them to even get an explanation as to why. So at least through this, there will be some sense of liability finally for these companies to express to Americans why. And God willing, that helps in some way.
I think that's really where the social media companies showed their arrogance. The fact that they put their standards, their policies out there for all to read. So you think when you sign up for these platforms that you're abiding the terms of participation. And as you just pointed out, all of a sudden your page disappears. And when you ask why, what did I do wrong so I can correct it, so I can learn from it, so I won't do it again, you get nothing. And I think that has really pushed Americans over the edge, where they see these social media companies for the huge balls of arrogance and smugness that they've become.
Absolutely. I mean, speaking to the contract, there's so many questionable things with, so when you get a terms of an agreement, Facebook, the attorneys there, everyone knows, no one really reads, right? The 4,000 page there, everyone just clicks accept. And that is legally called a contract of adhesion. And there are interesting practices when it comes to changing a contract of adhesion after it's already been signed, after it's already been agreed to. So the whole dealing with the contract with big tech is also something new that a lot of, again, legal minds greater than mine are looking at. How do we combat this? How do we make this more secure? And also we can, a whole thing I won't get into is the fact that they enter into contracts with minors frequently. So there's a lot of questionable gray areas when it comes to these contracts, but they should be held accountable. And I just, like we discussed previously, teachable moments. Let's allow an appeals process, allow these individuals to know why and know what they did wrong. Furthermore, this legislation writes specifically for censoring or deplatforming of political candidates, which is paramount because the 2008 Obama presidential campaign changed the way that social media was going to be contingent in running a race, any political race. And there are individuals who, while running a race, are deplatformed. You're inherently skewing the democratic process in that sense. And that's extremely egregious. So there are higher fees and penalties in this Florida law that are explicitly written for if a candidate is censored, which I think is important.
So we only have a couple minutes left, but this show is about basically good news where conservatives are fighting back and winning. And I ran down critical race theory fights and LGBTQ fights that parents are waging before school boards. And I kind of segued into you and what Heartland has been doing to fight social media and these big tech companies. And so just run down in the last couple minutes we have some sort of optimistic signs that you're seeing out there as you work with states around the nation to develop similar types of legislation.
There is truly a thirst from a lot of lawmakers and a lot of constituents for this. It is really interesting working in the legislative process. Sometimes a bill needs to be introduced 2 or 3 times before it gets passed just to get the idea in lawmakers' minds and get the ball rolling. And the fact that there were 70 pieces of legislation across the state or across the country, it shows an overwhelming message that a lot of lawmakers and a lot of constituents, they've noticed and they care. And so this is just the beginning. And I feel like this is going to be the snowball. And if this does hold up in court, this Florida bill, which I'm confident that it will, then I think other states will be way more eager to pass similar legislation in all of their states. They're almost kind of like, think of legislatures as kind of children. You need one to get away with something or to show that it's okay, and then they all kind of come along. I don't mean to simplify it or be reductive, but it is that way sometimes.
No, that certainly is. If we had copycat legislation being pushed through even half the states, that would be a win for conservatives, because we're all tired of getting our voices stifled on social media. I know I am, and I'm sure Heartland. I'm sure you guys get booted off your fair share of social media as well.
Absolutely.
Samantha Fillmore, it's been a delight speaking with you, and I hope you come back, not just here, but on my podcast at the Washington Times, because I would love to discuss this issue as it progresses, as we go forth with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and consider donating to the Heartland Institute to support more vibrant free markets, greater individual liberties, and more videos like this one.